winds near 200 miles an hour, homes erased from their foundations, a community scarred forever. And yet, the official rating, EF4, not EF5. Tonight, we piece together a tornado so violent it broke every expectation, without breaking the rules that govern how we measure destruction. This is the story of the Rochelle-Fairdale tornado, the strongest storm that wasn't rated EF5, and the 2 minutes that changed everything. April 9th, 2015, Northern Illinois. A spring evening that would become a benchmark, a tragedy, and a debate that still echoes through meteorology today. Stay with me, because what you're about to see will challenge everything you thought you knew about how tornadoes are rated, and why the most violent storms don't always earn the highest label. Let's rewind. April 9th, 2015. Thursday evening. Across the Midwest, the atmosphere was restless. The Storm Prediction Center had been watching a potent system for days. Upper-level jet dynamics, rich low-level moisture streaming north from the Gulf, and a sharp dry line. All the ingredients were aligning over Illinois. By mid-afternoon, tornado watches blanketed northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. The National Weather Service office in Chicago, call sign LOT, was on high alert. This wasn't just another spring setup. The parameters were exceptional. Significant tornado parameter values were climbing. CAPE, convective available potential energy, was soaring past 3,000 joules per kilogram. Shear profiles were textbook. And then the storms fired. Supercells erupted along the boundary, each one rotating, each one capable of producing tornadoes. By late afternoon, warnings were flying. Doppler radar lit up with hook echoes, debris signatures, and velocity couplets that made veteran meteorologists sit up straight. 11 tornadoes would touch down across Illinois that day, 7 in the Chicago forecast area alone. But one would stand apart. The National Weather Service would later call it the strongest tornado in northern Illinois in 25 years. 25 years. Not since the Plainfield EF5 of 1990 had the region seen anything like this. But here's the thing. This one wouldn't be rated EF5. It would stop at EF4. And that decision, that's where our story really begins. Because when you look at the damage, when you see the radar signatures, when you hear the survivors, the question becomes unavoidable. Why not EF5? Hold that question. We'll answer it, but first, you need to see what happened, minute by minute, mile by mile. 6:39 p.m. Central Daylight Time, near Franklin Grove, Lee County, Illinois. A funnel descends from the base of a supercell thunderstorm. It touches down in open farmland, kicking up dirt and debris. The tornado has begun. At first, it's relatively weak. EF0, maybe EF1. Damage is confined to crops, fence lines, a few outbuildings. But the storm is moving northeast, and it's intensifying. Fast. By 6:45, the tornado is crossing into Ogle County. The funnel is widening. Winds are accelerating. Trees are being snapped, not just bent. Homes in rural areas are starting to take hits. 6:50 p.m. The tornado is approaching Rochelle, a city of about 9,500 people. Sirens wail. Residents scramble for basements, interior rooms, anywhere below ground. But the tornado, it wobbles slightly north. Rochelle is spared a direct hit. The core of the vortex stays just west and north of the city limits, carving through the community of Hillcrest and the surrounding countryside. This is where things escalate. Radar operators at the National Weather Service are watching in real time. The velocity couplet, the signature of rotation, is tightening. Peak inbound and outbound velocities are exceeding 120 miles per hour. And that's just what the radar beam can sample at altitude. On the ground, winds are far, far stronger. Then, something else appears on the screens. Something that makes meteorologists' hearts skip. Correlation coefficient drops. Let me explain. Correlation coefficient, often abbreviated CC, is a dual-polarization radar product. It measures how uniform the targets in the air are. Rain and hail, high correlation, close to 1.0. But when you start seeing values drop, down to 0.9, 0.8, 0.7. That means the radar is detecting a chaotic mix of debris: wood, metal, insulation, shingles, pieces of people's lives, lofted thousands of feet into the air. It's called a debris ball. And it's one of the most ominous signatures a meteorologist can see. At 6:58 p.m., the debris ball is unmistakable. The tornado is now violent. EF3 at minimum, likely EF4. 7:02 p.m. The tornado reaches peak intensity. It's west of Interstate 39, near the intersection of Illinois Routes 64 and 251. The funnel is now estimated at 600 to 700 yards wide. That's over a third of a mile. Winds are estimated near 200 miles per hour. Trees are not just snapped, they're debarked, stripped completely of bark and branches, reduced to pale, splintered stumps. Homes are obliterated. In some cases, only the foundation remains. Vehicles are thrown hundreds of yards. Asphalt is scoured from roads. This is EF4 damage, unquestionably. But to some observers, it looks even worse. It looks EF5. The tornado continues northeast, paralleling Interstate 39. Drivers on the highway see the massive wedge bearing down. Some pull over, some floor it, trying to outrun the storm. A few capture video, shaky, terrified footage of a monster on the horizon. And then, the tornado takes aim at a small village, Fairdale, Illinois. Population, roughly 200. A quiet rural village in DeKalb County. Tree-lined streets, single-family homes, a post office, a grain elevator. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. 7:10 p.m. The tornado, still at or near peak intensity, barrels into Fairdale from the southwest. There is no time, no warning beyond the sirens that have been blaring for minutes, no chance to run. In 120 seconds, Fairdale is devastated. 71 structures are damaged or destroyed. Homes are ripped apart. Roofs are peeled away like paper. Walls collapse inward. Entire houses are reduced to piles of splintered wood and twisted metal. The grain elevator, a tall, sturdy structure, takes a direct hit. It's mangled. Trees that have stood for decades are snapped at the base or uprooted entirely. Power lines are down everywhere. The village is plunged into darkness and chaos. And then, the human cost. 2 people lose their lives. Geraldine Schultz, 67 years old. Known to friends and family as Jerry. Jacqueline Closa, 69. 2 women, 2 families shattered. 22 others are injured across the entire tornado track, some critically. Among the survivors is Clem Schultz, Jerry's husband. In the minutes before the tornado hit, Clem made a decision that would haunt him and serve as a warning to thousands. He went upstairs, he grabbed his phone, and he started filming. The video is shaky, dark, punctuated by the roar of wind. You can hear the tornado approaching, a freight train rumble that grows louder, unbearable, and then, impact. The house disintegrates around him, the camera goes black. Clem survived, Jerry did not. In interviews afterward, Clem was candid, raw. He thought the tornado would miss. He thought he had time. He wanted to capture it. He was wrong. And he wants everyone to know, do not do what he did. Do not film. Do not wait. Do not stay upstairs. When a tornado warning is issued, you go to the lowest level of your home. Interior room, no windows. You cover yourself. You protect your head. You do not watch. You do not record. Because in the time it takes to pull out your phone, the storm can take everything. Fairdale, in those 2 minutes, became a symbol, a tragedy. A case study in the raw, unforgiving power of a violent tornado. But it also became the center of a scientific question that would ripple through the meteorological community. If this wasn't EF5, what would be? By 7:20 p.m., the tornado is weakening. It crosses into southern Boone County, near Cherry Valley Road, and finally, it dissipates. Total time on the ground, approximately 40 minutes. Total path length, 30.2 miles. Maximum width, 700 yards. Peak estimated wind speed near 200 miles per hour. Rating EF4. In the hours and days that follow, National Weather Service survey teams fan out across the damage path. They document everything: photographs, measurements, GPS coordinates. They examine foundations, roof structures, wall failures. They look at how homes were anchored. They study tree damage, vehicle displacement, the scouring of soil. They also review the radar data. The debris signature, that correlation coefficient drop, was profound. The debris ball was lofted to over 15,000 feet. That's nearly 3 miles into the sky. Windborne debris, carried by the updraft, scattered across a massive area. Pieces of Fairdale were found miles away. The engineering team from the University of Florida conducts an independent reconnaissance. Their report is meticulous. They note the construction quality of the homes, the types of fasteners used, the presence or absence of anchor bolts. They photograph sill plates, floor joists, and the remnants of exterior walls. And they conclude, this was a violent long-track tornado. The damage was consistent with EF4. In some localized areas, it approached the threshold of EF5, but did not cross it. That word, threshold, is key, because the Enhanced Fujita Scale is not a wind speed scale. It's a damage scale, and damage is complicated. The American Red Cross mobilizes. Volunteers pour into Fairdale and the surrounding communities. Shelters are opened, food, water, medical supplies. Cleanup begins almost immediately, but the emotional toll, that will take years. Funerals are held, vigils, the community grieves, and online, in forums and social media, a debate ignites. Why wasn't this rated EF5? Look at the destruction. Look at the radar. Look at the width, the length, the wind estimates. How is this not EF5? To answer that, we need to talk about how the EF scale actually works, because most people, even weather enthusiasts, don't fully understand it. And once you do, the Rochelle-Fairdale tornado makes a lot more sense. Here's the thing about the Enhanced Fujita Scale. It does not rate tornadoes based on measured wind speed. Let me say that again, because it's the most misunderstood aspect of tornado ratings. The EF scale rates tornadoes based on the damage they cause, to specific structures, using a detailed checklist. It's not about what the wind could do, it's about what the wind did do, to things we can measure and categorize. The scale uses something called damage indicators, DIs for short. These are types of structures: 1 or 2 family residences, small barns, schools, strip malls, hardwood trees, softwood trees, and so on. Each damage indicator has multiple degrees of damage, DODs. These range from minor cosmetic damage all the way up to complete destruction. For example, let's take DI number 2, 1 or 2 family residence, a typical wood frame home. DOD 1 might be threshold of visible damage, broken windows. DOD 5, loss of roof covering material, less than 20%. DOD 8, collapse of a wall. DOD 10, total destruction of the entire building, with all walls collapsed or gone. Each DOD corresponds to an estimated wind speed range. DOD 10 for a wood frame home, that's in the EF4 to EF5 range, roughly 170 to 200 plus miles per hour. But here's the critical detail. To assign an EF5 rating, the survey team needs to find damage that requires winds over 200 miles per hour to explain. And that's where construction quality comes in. A home that is well built, with proper anchor bolts securing the sill plate to the foundation, with hurricane straps connecting the roof to the walls, with quality sheathing and fasteners. That home is much harder to destroy. It takes higher winds to achieve the same level of damage. A home that is poorly anchored, with only nails, no bolts, holding the sill plate down, with minimal bracing, with older construction standards, that home can be completely destroyed by lower winds. Same tornado, same wind speed. Different damage outcomes. So, when surveyors examine the wreckage in Fairdale, they're not just looking at what was destroyed, they're looking at how it was built, and whether the destruction requires EF5 winds to explain. In Fairdale, most of the homes were typical rural construction, wood frame, nailed to foundations, not bolted. Some were older, some had been remodeled over the years, but the core structure was modest. The tornado destroyed them, completely. But the surveyors determined that EF4 winds, near 200 miles per hour, were sufficient to cause that destruction. There was no damage that required winds above 200 miles per hour. No well-anchored modern homes swept completely away with only a bare slab remaining. No reinforced concrete structures obliterated. No damage to indicators that would push the rating higher. The trees were debarked, yes. Vehicles were thrown, yes. But debarking can occur in strong EF4 winds, especially with certain tree species. Vehicle displacement depends on the vehicle's orientation, weight, and whether it was airborne or rolled. Everything the surveyors saw could be explained by EF4, and so EF4 is what it was rated, not because it wasn't violent, not because it wasn't devastating, but because the damage indicators and degrees of damage by the rulebook did not require an EF5 designation. This is why EF5 tornadoes are so rare. It's not that violent tornadoes are rare. It's that the specific combination of extreme winds and structures capable of revealing those extreme winds is rare. Since the Enhanced Fujita Scale was implemented in 2007, there have been only a handful of EF5 tornadoes in the United States. Greensburg, Kansas, 2007. Parkersburg, Iowa, 2008. Joplin, Missouri, 2011. Moore, Oklahoma, 2013. And a few others. Each one had damage that could only be explained by winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. Well-built homes swept to bare foundations, reinforced structures obliterated, ground scouring, pavement removal. Rochelle-Fairdale had severe damage. But it didn't have that. And here's the kicker. If the exact same tornado, same winds, same intensity, had struck a different location, with different structures, it might have been rated EF5. Let me show you what I mean. After the Rochelle-Fairdale tornado, the University of Florida's Wind Hazard Research Team conducted a detailed study. They didn't just document what happened. They modeled what could have happened. What if the tornado had tracked 30 miles south? What if, instead of rural Ogle and DeKalb counties, it had plowed through the densely populated suburbs northwest of Chicago, places like Schaumburg, Palatine, Arlington Heights? The results were sobering. The same tornado, with the same wind speeds, would have encountered thousands more structures, more people, more vehicles, more infrastructure. The fatality count could have been in the dozens, possibly over 100, the injury count in the hundreds. The economic losses would have skyrocketed from tens of millions into the billions, and the rating possibly higher. Because in those suburbs there are more well-built homes, more modern construction, more structures with proper anchoring, engineered to higher standards. If the tornado had destroyed those homes down to the foundation, if it had caused damage that required winds over 200 miles per hour, then yes, EF5 would have been on the table. But it didn't hit those areas. It hit Fairdale. And the structures in Fairdale, by the standards of the EF scale, did not require EF5 winds to explain their destruction. This is the paradox of tornado ratings. The rating is not a measure of the tornado's true intensity. It's a measure of the evidence the tornado left behind. A tornado's rating can be limited by where it hits and what it hits. This is why some meteorologists and engineers argue that the EF scale, while useful, has limitations. It's damage-based, which means it's inherently tied to human infrastructure. A violent tornado that stays over open fields might be rated EF0, not because it was weak, but because there was nothing there to damage. Conversely, a tornado that hits a mobile home park can rack up a high fatality count, even at EF2 or EF3 intensity. Because mobile homes are extremely vulnerable, the rating tells you about damage. It does not tell you the full story of the tornado's power. And in the case of Rochelle-Fairdale, the full story is this. It was almost certainly one of the most intense tornadoes to hit northern Illinois in decades. The radar data supports it. The debris signature supports it. The eyewitness accounts support it. But the damage, by the rules, said EF4. And so, EF4 it remains. Let's go back to that radar signature for a moment, because it tells a story that numbers alone cannot capture. When dual-polarization radar scans a thunderstorm, it's sending out pulses of energy in two orientations, horizontal and vertical. The way those pulses bounce back tells us not just where precipitation is, but what kind of targets are in the air. Rain, the returns are uniform, consistent. The correlation coefficient stays high, near 1.0. Hail, still relatively uniform, though the returns are stronger. But debris? Debris is chaotic, irregular shapes tumbling through the air. Wood, metal, plastic, glass, insulation, roofing materials, furniture, pieces of walls, pieces of lives. When radar detects that chaos, the correlation coefficient drops. And on April 9, 2015, as the Rochelle-Fairdale tornado reached peak intensity, the correlation coefficient plummeted. Values dropped below 0.7 in the core of the circulation. That's not just debris. That's a massive debris cloud, lofted to extraordinary heights. The debris ball was tracked to over 15,000 feet above ground level. Think about that. Pieces of homes, trees, vehicles, carried nearly 3 miles into the sky by the updraft of the supercell. This is one of the hallmarks of a violent tornado. Not just the destruction on the ground, but the lofting of debris to altitudes that defy comprehension. Meteorologists who reviewed the data afterward noted that the debris signature was among the most pronounced they'd seen in years. It rivaled signatures from confirmed EF5 tornadoes in other events. And yet, the rating remained EF4, because the radar doesn't assign the rating. The damage does, but the radar gives us a window into the storm's true power, independent of what it happened to hit. And by that measure, Rochelle-Fairdale was a beast. The velocity couplet, the signature of rotation, was equally impressive. Peak gate-to-gate velocities exceeded 130 miles per hour at the radar's sampling altitude. And remember, that's several thousand feet above the ground. The actual wind speeds at the surface and the tornado itself were far higher. Estimates based on the damage put peak winds near 200 miles per hour. Some researchers, looking at the most extreme localized damage, suggested winds may have briefly touched 210, even 220. But without damage indicators that require those higher winds to explain, the estimate stays conservative, 200, EF4. This is the tension at the heart of tornado rating. We have incredible technology, radar that can see inside storms, detect debris, measure rotation. But the rating system is still tied to what happens on the ground, to structures, using a checklist developed from engineering studies and wind tunnel tests. It's a good system. It's rigorous, but it's not perfect. And Rochelle-Fairdale sits right at that edge, where the radar says one thing and the damage checklist says another. Let's return to the people for a moment, because behind every data point, every wind estimate, every damaged structure, there are human beings whose lives were changed forever. Clem Schultz's story became national news, his video, his loss, his warning. But he wasn't the only one with a story to tell. Across Fairdale and the surrounding communities, survivors emerged from basements and storm shelters to find their world transformed. Homes they'd lived in for decades, gone. Neighborhoods they'd walked through every day, unrecognizable. One family described huddling in their basement as the house above them disintegrated. They heard the roar, felt the pressure change, heard the walls collapsing, and then silence. When they climbed out, the stairs were gone. The first floor was gone. They had to crawl through debris to reach daylight. Another resident, who lived just outside the main damage path, described watching the tornado from a distance, a massive dark wedge backlit by lightning, moving with terrifying speed. They said it looked like the end of the world. In Rochelle, where the tornado narrowly missed the main population center, residents counted their blessings, but also felt the weight of survivors' guilt. Why were they spared when Fairdale, just a few miles away, was devastated? Emergency responders arrived within minutes. Fire departments, police, paramedics, all converging on Fairdale in the darkness. The power was out. Streets were blocked by debris. Downed power lines sparked in the wreckage. Search and rescue operations began immediately. Teams went door to door, or what was left of doors, calling out, listening for voices, for signs of life. The 2 fatalities were confirmed that night. Geraldine Schultz and Jacqueline Closa. Both had been in their homes when the tornado struck. Both were found in the rubble. The injured were triaged and transported to hospitals in Rochelle, DeKalb, and Rockford. Broken bones, lacerations, head trauma. Some would recover quickly. Others would carry the scars, physical and emotional, for the rest of their lives. In the days that followed, the American Red Cross set up shelters and relief stations. Volunteers from across Illinois and neighboring states poured in. They brought food, water, clothing, medical supplies. They helped families navigate insurance claims, find temporary housing, begin the long process of rebuilding. The community of Fairdale, small as it was, became a symbol of resilience. Neighbors helped neighbors. Strangers became friends. Amid the devastation, there were stories of hope, of survival, of people pulling together. But there was also grief, deep, aching grief. Funerals were held for Gary Schultz and Jacqueline Closa. The services were packed. People came from all over to pay their respects, to support the families, to mourn. Clem Schultz spoke at his wife's funeral. He was raw, honest. He talked about their life together, the decades they'd shared. He talked about the tornado, the decision he made to film, the seconds that changed everything. And he made a plea. Learn from my mistake. Don't film. Don't wait. When a tornado warning is issued, take it seriously. Go to your safe place. Protect yourself and your loved ones. His words resonated. The video he'd captured, as harrowing as it was, became a teaching tool. The National Weather Service, local emergency managers, and safety advocates used it to drive home the message. Tornadoes are not spectacles to be filmed. They are life-threatening emergencies. Every year, people die because they underestimate tornadoes. They think they have time. They think it will miss. They want to see it, to capture it on camera. And sometimes, they're wrong. Clem's story, Jerry's death, became a cautionary tale, a reminder that no video, no photograph is worth your life. So we've established why Rochelle-Fairdale was rated EF4, but let's zoom out for a moment and talk about EF5 tornadoes in general, because understanding their rarity helps explain why this tornado didn't make the cut. Since the Enhanced Fujita Scale was adopted in 2007, there have been fewer than 10 EF5 tornadoes in the United States. Fewer than 10 in nearly 2 decades. Compare that to the number of EF4 tornadoes, dozens, and the number of EF3 and below, hundreds, thousands. Why are EF5s so rare? It's not because violent tornadoes are rare. We know from radar data, from storm surveys, from eyewitness accounts, that tornadoes with winds exceeding 200 miles per hour occur more often than the EF5 count would suggest. The rarity comes down to evidence. To rate a tornado EF5, you need damage that can only be explained by winds over 200 miles per hour, and that requires a very specific set of circumstances. First, the tornado has to be violent. That's a given. But violent tornadoes often track through rural areas, farmland, forests. If there are no structures to damage, there's no evidence to rate. Second, the tornado has to hit structures that are strong enough to require extreme winds to destroy. A poorly anchored mobile home can be obliterated by EF2 winds. A well-built modern home with proper anchoring and reinforcement, that takes EF4 or EF5 winds to completely destroy. Third, the surveyors have to find that damage and correctly interpret it. They have to rule out other factors, construction defects, pre-existing damage, secondary failures. They have to be confident that the destruction they're seeing required winds above 200 miles per hour. All 3 of those conditions have to align, and they rarely do. This is why some researchers have proposed alternative rating methods. Some suggest using mobile Doppler radar to directly measure wind speeds in tornadoes, bypassing the damage-based system entirely. Others propose expanding the list of damage indicators to include more rural and natural features. things like soil scouring, tree debarking, pavement removal, that can provide evidence of extreme winds even in areas without buildings. But as of now, the EF scale remains the standard, and it remains tied to structural damage. Let's look at a recent example that illustrates how the rating process is evolving. In June of 2025, a tornado struck near Watford City, North Dakota. Initial surveys rated it EF4, but months later, after extensive review of additional evidence, including high-resolution imagery, forensic analysis of structural failures, and consultation with engineers, the rating was upgraded to EF5. This was significant. It showed that the rating process is not set in stone. New evidence, new analysis can change the outcome. But it also showed how rigorous the standard is. The surveyors had to be absolutely certain that the damage required winds over 200 miles per hour. They had to document it, justify it, defend it. And even then, the upgrade was controversial. Some experts agreed. Others argued the evidence was borderline, that EF4 was sufficient. This is the reality of tornado rating. It's as much art as science. It requires judgment, interpretation, expertise. And in the case of Rochelle-Fairdale, the judgment was EF4. Could it have been EF5? Possibly if the tornado had hit different structures, if the surveyors had found different evidence. But with what they had, EF4 was the call, and that call stands. Let's drill down into one specific detail that often determines whether a tornado is rated EF4 or EF5, how a house is anchored to its foundation. It sounds mundane, technical, but it's absolutely critical. When a tornado strikes a home, one of the first failure points is the connection between the house and the foundation. If that connection fails, the entire structure can be lifted and thrown. If it holds, the house has a chance, albeit a small one in a violent tornado, of staying in place even if the walls and roof are destroyed. There are two main ways to anchor a wood frame house to its foundation: nails or bolts. Nails are cheaper, faster, and were the standard in older construction. The sill plate, the bottom horizontal beam of the house, is nailed down into the top of the foundation, or the sill plate is simply resting on the foundation with the studs nailed into it. Bolts, specifically anchor bolts, are stronger. They go through the sill plate and deep into the concrete foundation, secured with nuts and washers. They're much harder to pull out. In a violent tornado, the difference is stark. A house anchored with nails can be completely destroyed, lifted off the foundation, disintegrated, by winds in the EF3 to EF4 range. 160 to 200 miles per hour. A house anchored with bolts, especially if it also has hurricane straps and proper sheathing, requires higher winds to achieve the same level of destruction. EF4 to EF5 range, 200 miles per hour and above. So, when surveyors examine the wreckage, one of the first things they look for is, how was this house anchored? If they find evidence of anchor bolts, bent bolts still embedded in the foundation, holes in the sill plate where bolts were ripped through, that suggests the house was well anchored. And if it was still completely destroyed, that suggests very high winds. Possibly EF5. If they find only nails or no clear anchoring at all, then the destruction can be explained by lower winds. EF4 or even EF3. In Fairdale, most of the homes were older, rural construction. Many were anchored with nails, not bolts. Some had minimal anchoring at all. This doesn't mean the homes were poorly built by the standards of their time. It just means they weren't built to withstand a violent tornado. Very few homes are, but it does mean that the destruction, as total as it was, could be explained by EF4 winds. If Fairdale had been full of modern, well-anchored homes, and those homes had been swept away to bare foundations with anchor bolts ripped out, then EF5 would have been justified. But that's not what the surveyors found. They found homes that were destroyed by winds consistent with EF4, near 200 miles per hour. Devastating, yes, but not beyond the EF4 threshold. This is why construction quality matters so much in tornado ratings. It's not just about the tornado, it's about what the tornado hits. And it's why, in some ways, the EF scale is as much a measure of building codes and construction practices as it is a measure of tornadoes. We've talked a lot about the science, the ratings, the technical details, but let's not lose sight of the human cost. The psychological toll that a disaster like this leaves behind. For the survivors of the Rochelle-Fairdale tornado, life didn't return to normal after the debris was cleared and the homes were rebuilt. For many, it never would. Post-traumatic stress disorder is common among tornado survivors, especially those who experienced violent, long-track tornadoes like this one. The sound of the wind, the sight of dark clouds, even a thunderstorm on a summer afternoon. These can trigger intense anxiety, flashbacks, panic attacks. Children are particularly vulnerable. Kids who lived through the Fairdale tornado, who saw their homes destroyed, who lost neighbors and friends. Many of them struggled for years afterward. Nightmares, fear of storms, difficulty concentrating in school. Adults, too, carried the weight. Some couldn't bring themselves to rebuild in the same location. They moved away, started over somewhere else, somewhere that felt safer. Even though, rationally, they knew tornadoes can strike anywhere. Others stayed. They rebuilt on the same foundations in the same town, determined not to let the tornado win. But even for them, the fear lingered. Every tornado watch, every warning brought back the memories. Clem Schultz became an advocate for tornado safety, but he also became a symbol of loss. In interviews, he was open about his grief, his guilt, his struggle to move forward. He wanted people to learn from his experience, but reliving it over and over took a toll. The community of Fairdale, small and tight-knit, rallied together. They held memorials on the anniversary of the tornado. They supported each other through the rebuilding process. They created a sense of solidarity, of shared survival. But the scars remained. Empty lots where homes once stood. Trees that never grew back. A landscape forever changed. And beyond Fairdale, the tornado left a mark on the broader region. People in Rochelle, in DeKalb County, in communities across northern Illinois. They all remembered where they were on April 9th, 2015. They remembered the warnings, the sirens, the fear. For meteorologists and emergency managers, the tornado became a case study. What worked? What didn't? How could they communicate risk more effectively? How could they save more lives next time? Because there will be a next time. Tornadoes are a fact of life in the Midwest. The question is not if another violent tornado will strike, but when and where, and whether we'll be ready. So, what did we learn from the Rochelle-Fairdale tornado? First, and most importantly, take warnings seriously. Every single time. It's easy to become complacent, especially if you've lived through multiple tornado warnings that turned out to be false alarms. But all it takes is one real tornado, one direct hit, to change everything. When a tornado warning is issued for your area, act immediately. Go to your safe place, lowest level of your home, interior room, away from windows. If you're in a mobile home, get out and go to a sturdy building or a designated shelter. If you're in a vehicle and you can't outrun the tornado, abandon the vehicle and lie flat in a ditch or low-lying area, covering your head. Do not try to film the tornado. Do not go outside to watch. Do not wait to see if it's really coming. Clem Schultz's story is a tragic reminder of what can happen when we underestimate these storms. Second, construction matters. Building codes matter. Homes built to modern standards with proper anchoring, reinforced connections, and impact-resistant materials have a much better chance of surviving, or at least protecting their occupants, than older homes or homes built to minimal standards. If you live in a tornado-prone area, consider retrofitting your home. Anchor bolts, hurricane straps, reinforced garage doors, safe rooms. These upgrades can save lives. Third, the EF scale, while useful, has limitations. It's a damage-based scale, which means it's inherently tied to what the tornado hits. A violent tornado that stays over open fields might be rated EF0. A weaker tornado that hits a vulnerable area might cause more casualties. The rating tells you about damage, not about the tornado's true intensity. And it certainly doesn't tell you about the risk to human life. This is why meteorologists emphasize the threat, not just the rating. A tornado warning means danger, period. Whether it ends up being rated EF0 or EF5, you need to take shelter. Fourth, radar technology has come a long way, but it's not a substitute for ground truth. Dual-polarization radar, debris signatures, velocity couplets. These tools give us incredible insight into what's happening inside a storm, but they don't tell us everything. We still need trained surveyors on the ground, examining the damage, interpreting the evidence. And we need to continue improving our tools. Mobile Doppler radar, high-resolution satellite imagery, drone surveys. All of these are helping us understand tornadoes better. But the ultimate goal is not just to rate tornadoes more accurately. It's to predict them more accurately, to warn people earlier, to save more lives. And that brings us to the fifth lesson. Community resilience matters. Fairdale survived not just because of emergency response, but because of the strength of its community. Neighbors helping neighbors, volunteers from across the region, organizations like the Red Cross providing support. Disasters like this reveal the best in people, and they remind us that we're all in this together. Let's return to that University of Florida study one more time, because the counterfactual scenario they modeled is chilling. Imagine the same tornado, same intensity, same wind speeds, same debris signature, but instead of tracking through rural Ogle and DeKalb counties, it tracks 30 miles south, through the northwest suburbs of Chicago, Schaumburg, Hoffman Estates, Palatine, Arlington Heights, Elk Grove Village. These are densely populated areas, tens of thousands of people, thousands of homes, schools, shopping centers, businesses. The tornado, 700 yards wide, plows through neighborhood after neighborhood. Homes are obliterated. Schools collapse. Shopping centers are reduced to rubble. The death toll could easily reach into the hundreds. The injury count into the thousands. The economic losses would be staggering. Not tens of millions, but billions of dollars. Emergency response would be overwhelmed. Hospitals would be flooded with casualties. Roads would be impassable. Power would be out for days, maybe weeks. It would be one of the worst natural disasters in Illinois history, possibly in U.S. history. And the rating? With that many structures, including well-built modern homes, schools, and commercial buildings. If the tornado destroyed them all down to the foundations, if it left evidence of winds exceeding 200 miles per hour, then yes, EF5 would be justified. But here's the thing. The tornado itself would be the same winds, same intensity. The only difference would be where it hit. This is the uncomfortable truth about tornado ratings. They're not just about the tornado. They're about the intersection of the tornado and human infrastructure. A tornado's rating can be limited by geography, by construction quality, by sheer luck. Rochelle-Fairdale was devastating, but it could have been so much worse, and that's not a comforting thought. But it's an important one, because it reminds us that we can't control where tornadoes strike. We can only control how prepared we are when they do. Even now, nearly a decade later, the debate continues in some corners of the meteorological community. Should Rochelle-Fairdale have been rated EF5? Some argue yes. They point to the radar data, the debris signature, the width and length of the path, the eyewitness accounts. They argue that the tornado was clearly violent enough to produce EF5 damage, and that the lack of appropriate damage indicators was a limitation of the location, not the tornado. They suggest that the rating system should account for this, that we should be able to infer EF5 intensity from radar data and other evidence, even in the absence of classic EF5 structural damage. Others argue no. They point to the EF scale's clear methodology. Ratings are based on damage, period. If the damage doesn't require winds over 200 miles per hour to explain, then EF5 is not justified. They argue that changing the system to allow ratings based on inference or radar data alone would introduce subjectivity and inconsistency. The strength of the EF scale is its rigor, its reliance on observable, measurable damage. Both sides have valid points. The truth is, the EF scale is a tool. Like any tool, it has strengths and limitations. It's excellent at providing a standardized, consistent way to rate tornadoes based on damage. but it's less good at capturing the full picture of a tornado's intensity, especially in rural areas or areas with limited damage indicators. There's ongoing research into how to improve the system. Some proposals include expanding the list of damage indicators to include more natural and rural features, incorporating radar data more formally into the rating process, developing a secondary intensity scale that's independent of damage based on measured or inferred wind speeds. But for now, the EF scale is what we have, and by its standards, Rochelle-Fairdale was EF4, not because it wasn't violent, not because it wasn't devastating, but because the damage, as interpreted by trained surveyors using the established methodology, did not require an EF5 rating. And maybe that's okay. Maybe the rating isn't the most important thing. What's important is that we remember the lives lost, that we honor the survivors, that we learn the lessons, that we prepare for the next one, because the next violent tornado is coming. We don't know when, we don't know where, but it's coming. And when it does, we need to be ready. April 9th, 2015. The Rochelle-Fairdale tornado. 30.2 miles, 700 yards wide. Winds near 200 miles per hour. 2 lives lost, 22 injured, a community forever changed. The strongest tornado in northern Illinois in 25 years. And yet, not EF5. Not because the tornado wasn't powerful enough, but because the rules, the methodology, the damage indicators, said EF4. This is the story of a tornado that broke expectations without breaking the scale, a storm that revealed the limitations of how we measure nature's fury, a tragedy that taught us lessons we can't afford to forget. Clem Schultz wanted the world to know, don't do what he did, don't film, don't wait. When the warning comes, take shelter, protect yourself, protect your family, because in the end, the rating doesn't matter. EF4, EF5, it's all academic when you're in the path. What matters is survival. What matters is being prepared. What matters is respecting the power of these storms. The Rochelle-Fairdale tornado was a monster. By any measure, by any standard, it was violent, destructive, deadly. And it serves as a reminder. Tornadoes don't care about ratings. They don't care about statistics. They don't care about debates. They only care about the path they carve and the lives they touch. So the next time you hear a tornado warning, remember Fairdale. Remember Gary Schultz. Remember Jacqueline Cloza. Remember the homes that were there one moment and gone the next. And take shelter, because the strongest tornado is the one that hits you, and no rating in the world will change that.